So welcome. Today I'd like to give you some tips for how you can work with the data more effectively when you're working in Vivli data. I'm going to talk about supporting documents that are provided along with the individual patient data and how these documents work together to make it easier for you to do secondary research. I'm going to talk about the problem, the challenge, why it's important, where the sources of information are, and then some concrete examples about how you can use this information to make your life easier when you're doing secondary research using Vivli data. So the problem we see is that there are often queries from researchers to our members trying to really understand the data and the documentation that's been provided so that they feel like they know enough to do an appropriate secondary analysis. Sometimes the documents aren't available or they're perhaps identified inconsistently, so it's not clear to a researcher what they're looking for to answer their questions. And researchers, because of these other difficulties, might not really use the supporting documents to the fullest extent, and therefore it slows down their ability to do their research and makes them much more dependent upon sponsors. We'd like to free up the researchers to understand as much as they can about the data before they have to reach out to sponsors and can focus their discussions on more scientific questions rather than logistical questions. So obtaining access to IPD is the first step. It's the first critical step, but it's not sufficient to effectively perform secondary research. Additional information is really needed to contextualize your study, and there's also technical information that will make it much easier for you to understand and use data in subsequent analyses. So the areas of real interest are the study design, including the population, the treatments, the timing of measurements, variables that are analyzed, the statistical analysis plan, which gives you much more detail about specific primary and secondary endpoints, and also defines how variables are created. You may have a variable named in the protocol, but it's in the statistical analysis plan that the actual derivation algorithms that are used to calculate them reside. Also, methods for handling data, missing data are included in the analysis plan, and the analytical methods that were used in the original analysis. Then data handling conventions, including what variable from the case report form is the source of data and variables, the dictionaries that were used, and again, the definitions of the variable. So you know that in fact, if you're looking at two variables in different data sets with the same name, whether or not they actually mean the same thing and have the same definition. And of course, the study outcome, the results that were the outcome of the original study and the original analyses are critically important so you can understand whether or not the appropriate analyses you're planning will work, or whether the analyses you're planning are appropriate. Why is it important? You want to make sure that you can perform a scientifically valid analysis. In order to do that, you need to understand the underlying design and study population of the original study. You want to make sure the statistical basis is understood. You need to understand the treatments that were studied, including the dosing, the timing, study regimens, the meaning of the variables, and the objectives of the study. The research that you want to do needs to be consistent and doable within the objectives of the original study. Particularly if you want to analyze data and aggregate across studies, you need to understand whether or not the studies can be combined. It's not enough to just take two studies and put them together. They need to have consistent elements of study populations and designs and endpoints so that in fact you can appropriately combine the data. If you can refer to this basic information, that will help you really design your secondary analysis, ensure that you understand as much as you can before reaching out to sponsors if you need to for any sort of scientific information to help support your analysis. We can free you up from requiring the support of the sponsors for administrative or logistical kinds of questions and focus your questions and interactions on the scientific needs. So where can we find this information? I'll tell you what the documents are and then describe a little bit about what can be found in them. There is a recommended set of documents that that are recommended by Vivli. Sometimes these don't exist, particularly for older studies, or if the study was not, the current sponsor is not the sponsor who performed the study originally. But where they're available, we recommend that this documents are provided. So the study protocol. And there, what's really important is that make sure that you have the latest version of the protocol with all the amendments that's relevant to the IPD data set that you're looking at if it's not the final study. Data dictionary or an annotated case report form that gives you detailed information about the variables, including definitions, coding, sources, so that you can understand clearly what the variables are that you're analyzing and make sure you choose the right variables. The statistical analysis plan, which is a description of the principal features of the analysis, described in the protocol, including specific information about how data is handled, how it's derived, which patients are included or excluded from an analysis, and how missing data is handled. The clinical study report, that's the report that summarizes the efficacy and safety data from the study after regulatory, and that's available after a regulatory decision. And then, of course, the individual patient data set, that's the final cleaned, that's individual patient level data that's been de-identified or anonymized, and that's available at the most detailed level for you to look at and use for your analysis. Optional documents, and this is information that could help you even further but may not be provided, is analytical code, and that's the actual software that was used to carry out prescribed analyses. The analysis-ready IPD data set, so what that is, that's also data available at the individual patient level, but this is data that's been processed so that data variables have been derived, missing data algorithms have been imputed, and flags may be included. This allows you to carry out specific analyses in the same way that a sponsor did it. This should help you reproduce sponsor analyses. And then the case report forms, which are the forms that are used to collect the data that's described in the protocol. This is available for each participant. And this differs from the annotated case report form, which is just the description of the information that's collected. This is the data at the individual patient level. I'll talk about a few examples to show you how you can use this information in some hypothetical research situations. So the first example, a researcher wants to perform a secondary analysis, in this case on an Alzheimer's disease study, but it could be any kind of study. And so they want to make sure that they understand the study population and the primary variables. So when they design their study, they're really doing the right thing. So where can you find this information? The study protocol would be a key document because that will describe the patient population, the primary endpoint, the timing of data collection, all of the information that's needed to really understand and contextualize the data that has been collected. The analysis plan, the SAP, which provides, again, derivations for primary variables, key time points that are used for analyses and selected for analysis. Again, how, particularly for CNS studies, because there are often rating scales that are used or variables or combinations of multiple items, it tells you how they were handled, if there are missing items, or how, in fact, their items are weighted or otherwise put together to form the variables that are analyzed. And the data dictionary, which provides the coding conventions and the variable names, again, so that you know that you're sure to be combining and looking at variables. You understand what they mean, and you understand their meaning when you use them. In the second example, the researcher wants to do a meta-analysis using individual patient-level data across several studies. So there's some of the specific needs are to understand analytical methods and endpoints for each study, the study population, the diagnostic entry criteria, the treatments that were used, and the comparators. And again, thinking about where this can be found, the analytical code would give you the specific statistical models that were used to analyze. And since every study has its own code and different teams or different sponsors may have used different methods, made different assumptions in how they put the data together, this is critically important to understand how you can combine data across studies. It shows the methods that were used and data imputations, again, so you can ensure that as you aggregate data, you're analyzing the same data across various studies, not incorrectly putting together variables that have different meanings and thinking they're the same thing. The analysis-ready data sets, that would include analysis population flags and variables, deviations. The study protocol, which provide the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And so there you can make sure that you have similar populations, or at least there are subsets of populations. There is an overlap between the populations. The disease criteria, if one study studies mild to moderate patients and another studies severe patients, you can make sure you're combining like with like when you do your aggregated analysis, or you can make appropriate adjustments if they're not the same. And then the clinical study report, which would give you the consistency of study results and the treatments that were included across the various studies. You want to make sure that if the results are really radically different across the individual studies, you understand that before you just put them all together into an integrated meta-analysis. It may be important to understand the differences between the studies and therefore recognize which studies can be included in the meta-analysis and which ones may be dissimilar enough that they shouldn't in fact be included in this meta-analysis. And the third example is that a researcher wants to perform an exploratory analysis to generate new research questions. And there they really want to understand all the variables that were collected, the relationships among variables not previously explored. So here you may really want to focus on understanding a lot of information about the variables. So the case report form would provide all of the variables, the actual questions that were used to collect the data, coding dictionaries, and the statistical analysis plan would give you statistical assumptions for all of the variables, and also the actual algorithms and derivations for creating the variables that were analyzed. If they were aggregate variables or compound variables, will show you how the variables are put together. It may show you how you think about the different variables and what kinds of relationships may exist among the variables that would make sense to study and include in your analysis. So there are many, many other examples that we could come up with, but these are just 3 specific examples that I hope will help you think about how you can use these documents, understand what's in the documents, and make sure that you're well prepared to find the answers that you need to do your secondary analysis. If you can't find them in the documents you have, then clearly you can go back to Vivli or the sponsors, but this will give you a lot more support in defining your analysis and give you more freedom to move your research ahead without the need to go back and ask lots of questions. So thank you for your time. And again, we wanted to just make sure you understood how these documents, which are usually provided and available, can be used to help you, the researcher, do your secondary analysis.